I'm Ann Dark.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to episode 122 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. And today we have a visit with D.C. Alexander.
D.C. Alexander is a former federal agent, which leads me to believe that's not his real name. His debut novel, The Legend of Devil's Creek, hit #1 on the Amazon Kindle bestsellers list in 2014 and has been either downloaded or purchased as a paperback more than 180,000 times as of June 2017. His second novel, The Shadow Priest, was described as a great beach read by the USA Today network. He was born and raised in the Seattle area and now lives in Louisville, Kentucky. In Blood in the Bluegrass, a few days before the Kentucky Derby, a rising star jockey is found murdered near Churchill Downs. Louisville homicide detective Laurel Arno's investigation, from the private dens of elite gamblers to the ancestral mansions of Kentucky bourbon barons and horse breeders, to the treacherous corridors of a depraved state capital. Along the way, she exposes a shadowy world of political corruption, secret societies, and ancient feuds. As she closes in on a hidden killer, she discovers that a killer may also be closing in on her.
We would like to introduce D.C. Alexander. He is the author of a fascinating new book, Murder in the Bluegrass. Welcome, D.C.
Thanks for having me. I'm grateful.
Your book was a very good mystery, but the food. I got hungry with all the places your protagonist visited in the book. Ever think of putting recipes in the back of your book?
That's a great idea. I actually did consider that this time around, and I thought that maybe a recipe for buttermilk biscuits would be the most appropriate thing, given that both detectives eat them in the book, and because Louisville is such a good biscuit town. I also thought about putting my top secret fried chicken recipe in there. It's outstanding. So maybe for the next one. So I have to say, when I was writing the manuscript, I tend to go park myself in quiet corners of libraries, and I'd be writing these scenes about these restaurants I love, and I'd have to quit writing because I'd start getting hungry. So it actually impeded my progress as an author.
Well, you're obviously knowledgeable about the food scene in Louisville, but are you as fond of food as Trey?
Yeah, I'm a huge foodie. I love to eat, love creativity in restaurant menus. Louisville is fortunately a very easy place to be a foodie. There are just an unbelievable number of good restaurants for a city the size of Louisville. A lot of experimentation, people modernizing Southern cuisine. I think one of the reasons we have this is that unlike in your New Yorks and San Franciscos and Seattles, there's a lot of affordable space here where if you're a young chef or a restaurateur starting out, you can afford to rent a space and open your business. Some neat old places. I mean, Louisville's just full of big old brick warehouses and factories built 100 years ago, buildings with just tons of character. I think that really just brings in a wave of creative young people, your cultural seed corn, I guess you could call it. So,
not a town for Weight Watchers.
No, I'll tell you. The only thing that's keeping me from being morbidly obese is that I can't afford to eat out all the time. So.
We did contemplate, when you moved there, did you gain weight?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you really have to be careful. So much of the great food here, it's heavy. It's not,
Good old Southern fried chicken.
Yes, I mean, delicious, but in moderation.
But speaking of the areas with character, is the cave, I guess it was, in your book a real place where they had the concert?
Yes, that's actually very close to my house.
Wow.
That sounds really cool.
I think we need a road trip, ladies.
Yeah.
But we have a food guide here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Come
And
to
just
town.
take the book with us and look at the back page.
Absolutely. We'll rent a van and I'll drive you all around. But then when I come to Maryland, I want you to take me to all your blue crab restaurants.
You got it. You got it.
On to horse racing, as Louisville is quite known for, somewhat. You mentioned several methods of switching horses and putting a proxy in a race. Have these actually been tried in the racing world?
Yeah, one of the cases I have the detectives discussing in the book, it's something that really happened. I don't want to give away anything about the plot, but I'll say that I don't know of anyone having used the particular trick I mentioned in the story. There have definitely been horse swaps, by which I mean trainers switching out a contender for a horse with long odds. In fact, the one I mentioned in the story involves a horse vet named Mark Gerard, who was actually the vet for Secretariat, great Triple Crown winner of the early 70s. In the 1976, this vet, Gerard, he went down to South America and bought two horses, one of which was named, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Lebon, and the other was Cinzano. And the horses looked identical, but one of them was a champion racer and the other was a complete dud. He brings them back to the United States, and he claims that the champion horse died in an accident and collects his $150,000 in insurance payout, and then enters the champion horse. He claims it was the dud horse that died. Then he enters the champion horse in this race under the other horse's name, and it has 57-1 odds, just ridiculous odds. And it, of course, wins the race. And he got caught because made a gigantic bet on his long odds imposter horse. It would have been, in today's dollars, it would have been about $350,000 in winnings. And of course, because he was a famous vet, officials at Belmont Racetrack in New York recognized him when he came to collect his gigantic pile of cash and dug around, and they, arrested him. Yeah, it was an interesting story. He actually, just did a little interesting tidbit. He hired F. Lee Bailey, O.J. Simpson's lawyer, to defend him. Bailey actually got him off with just a little slap on the wrist, despite the magnitude of the theft.
Wow.
Yeah. It happens.
Is betting on your own horse allowed?
Yeah, people do it. I mean, I think a lot of times if you have a scam, and this is all hearsay, of course, I don't have any firsthand evidence of people doing this. Typically, in theory, people have friends and family make a whole bunch of small bets so it doesn't attract a lot of attention. And instead of you coming in like Mark Gerard did and placing a gigantic bet on your long odds horse, which is just immediately suspicious. It's one way to get away with it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it. There you go. At the end of this book, there were a couple of questions that were left unanswered, like what happened to the senator, and we're hoping that Laurel and Trey's partnership goes on. Will there be a second book?
There probably will be. I always have a pile of outlines. Each year I pick one up and think, okay, now it's time for this one. I do think that I would like to write another story with those two. I typically fall in love with my characters, which is, I guess, to be expected given that writing is such solitary work, and I probably spend more time with my characters in the course of the year than I do with most people. But I think there's so much good material in the region to use as fodder for another mystery involving those two. Louisville is an old city. It certainly has more than its fair share of myth and mystery. As for the senator, I'll tell you, with Laurel and Trey first, I mean, their partnership was a product of typical police department policy of pairing an inexperienced detective with an old salt so that they can learn the ropes. And in a police department as big as Louisville, the two of them wouldn't necessarily stay together as a team like that. I mean, new case would come in, the detective would be up for the lead, and they'd get paired up with whoever they need. If I write another mystery set in Louisville, I'll certainly pair the two of them up again. And as for the senator, wondering what happened to him, sort of deliberately left that to the reader to ponder. Does the senator go down as, I'm not going to give away too much detail, as an accessory or for the things he's done, or does he pull strings and call in political favors?
Is he based on a current senator that
In order to not be sued, I should probably just say maybe.
We can leave that up to our imagination.
Yeah.
He's kind of an amalgamation of a lot of senators.
Okay, we'll go for that.
Yeah.
I've been to Seattle and flew into Louisville on my way to Lexington. Even these very brief visits were enough to have seen how different these two cities are. How did you come to settle in Louisville?
Well, I met my wife in the early 90s, and we've more or less taken turns following each other around the country, promising job opportunities. And she is now a pilot with the United Parcel Service. Louisville's their hub and headquarters for the airline. I don't know, we always love the adventure of living in different places, and shortly after after our daughter was born, we were living in Seattle again. I was in a law enforcement job that was just starting to make me miserable. We had a baby girl. And so we thought, hey, we have a great job opportunity, job situation. Louisville, you get to spend a ton more time at home with family if we're living in what the airline people call their domicile or base. So it was really a no-brainer. It has been a great move. It's certainly different from anywhere we've ever lived, socially, definitely politically, culturally. And like anywhere that's new to you, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's grown on us tremendously. It's an extremely friendly population relative to a lot of places we've lived, and we just met a ton of nice people. UPS Airlines is why we're here.
Will you have any moves in the future, or is this it?
Well, our family is all out on the west and down the West Pacific coast, but it's hard to imagine. We wanted to plant ourselves somewhere before our daughter started school, and at least wanted to stay here through her graduation. It's hard to say. I mean, we have a lot of great friends here. We love it. Food, of course. We probably maybe will split time between here and the West, where our family is.
You mentioned earlier about teaming up a veteran detective with an inexperienced, and it's a little unusual in fiction, at least, the veteran to be a female.
Right.
Did you have a Laurel Arno in your law enforcement career?
I definitely did. My first mentor in law enforcement was a female veteran. Overall, really, I would say, as a rough guess, I've had twice as many female supervisors as I have male, which I know is probably a bit of an unusual experience in such a male-dominated profession. And Laurel was my first female protagonist. I just wanted to try something different, and especially having a woman working in a male-dominated profession like law enforcement, just thought that would bring an interesting dynamic and issues that I could write about. So that was largely inspired by my wife and her experience as a pilot, which is similarly male-dominated. So I just wanted to kind of explore that. Hopefully people find it interesting. I certainly did.
Oh, definitely.
She was something else. She was so driven. She was every bit of a cop that I could ever imagine. But she was also willing to bend the rules. And why did you decide to write her like that?
I was thinking about kind of that classic combination of, one, realization that so many of us have, that these institutions we believed in or even maybe committed our lives to can be as flawed as anything else in the world and imperfect. And that, two, sometimes in order to stop something really terrible, your only option is to cross over the line. So it's sort of becomes a moral balancing act. If a small evil can prevent a bigger evil, is the small evil justified? People face the same sort of conundrum in business or in politics or in war. Of course, I made Laurel someone, as you mentioned, who's very rigid when it comes to her own personal moral code. We all have our breaking points.
In the book, you portray Louisville with the two worlds that we all deal with, the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
With your experience in law enforcement, what do you think needs to happen to heal Louisville?
That's a great question, one that's really being driven home in the last couple of weeks here. One of the things I tried to highlight in the book is the way that money buys political influence, which in turn can direct the decisions and the efforts and the accountability of government and law enforcement. And I think you just see the same problem at all levels of government, whether it's city or state or county or federal. How do you fix it? We pass laws that take the money out of the political system but are still constitutional? Or if not, can we amend the Constitution to change that? Do we have the political will as a nation? I don't know. Even though my story deals with this on sort of not micro level, but smaller level of state and city government, I do think this could end up being one of the defining issues of our times on a national level.
I once went to a discussion. I can't even remember what the discussion was about, but one of the things that was brought up was this gentleman who was a native of France. He said that he was astounded that lobbies are allowed to practice because it's legal bribery.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I actually have a lot of friends in the business. They're all nice people, but you just look at them and think your job is basically to take someone who was elected by people who want this, this, and this, and you're going to steer his decision-making based on your political connections or contributions to this guy's re-election campaign or whatever. It's like, I think it warps the system, to be sure.
I do have a question that I was curious about. With the Kentucky Derby being canceled this year, did that impact the economic situation down there?
Absolutely. Yeah, it just brings in millions and millions of dollars to the local economy. I'm sure like in most places, businesses with small margins in the service sector, like restaurants, are just hanging on by their fingernails. So I believe they actually are going to try to run it in September. I don't know if that's the most current information, which could actually be better because I think the weather's better in September.
Well, if you continue this series, will you kind of make it a racing theme like Dick Francis did?
That's a good question. I'll probably involve horse racing to some degree because there are just too many good trackside stories to ignore. And I loved writing about it. I'd actually never been to a horse race till we moved to Kentucky. It was just never anything that interested me in the least. I don't know why. Moving here, living here, you just can't help getting swept up in the excitement and the pageantry of the Kentucky Derby. It was really a cool thing. The horses are just so beautiful up close, so impressive, and it's quite a party.